So many people are talking about bias, unconscious bias, implicit bias, all of those concepts, and many of you in your organizations have probably had trainings around those topics. As I've mentioned before, when we talk about bias and unconscious bias and all these diversity topics, disability tends to be the one that's left out of these conversations. And so when we talk about bias around disability, there are statistics that 36% of people report having a bias against people with disabilities that says they are not as productive as those without disabilities. I get very angry at that statistic as a person with disability, but that's okay. Where do biases come from? And if you haven't had a bias training, I strongly recommend it. They're great trainings, and it's really eye-opening to see where you are, your patterns in your brains are patterned, and how you may think you don't necessarily think. So if you haven't had one of those trainings at your workplace, I highly recommend it. So bias isn't all bad, and that's one thing. People put bias and have this negative connotation to it, but that's not the case. Bias keeps us alive. Bias keeps us from walking out in the middle of the street because we've learned we don't walk out in the middle of the street unless we know no one's coming in the cars to run over us. It's saved our lives. Back in the day when we had tigers and lions and bears, oh my, we knew bias kept us safe by listening to the sounds and understanding our environments and knowing what was coming at any given time. So bias is things that have been ingrained in our brains to teach us so we don't have to relearn everything, every situation all the time. And that's not a bad thing. So when we have bias, especially around diversity, equity, inclusion issues, we want to make sure we see our bias, because we all have it. I have it, you have it, we all have it. But recognize that bias, understand it, say, hey, I must be thinking this way because of the way I was raised, or my grandparents or my aunts and uncles used to always say this. Let me challenge that and really try to repattern myself so that when I see a person with a disability, I don't automatically assume they're not employed, or I don't automatically assume they're on, public assistance. I don't automatically assume all these things that I've been taught, but I actually question myself, understand where that bias is coming from, and debunk it. Get rid of it. Throw it out. Really focus on engaging with people in those circles in which you know you have bias with, and really try and learn, understand, surround yourself with people so that you can grow and change as a person. And as an organization, if you don't have a particular type of person, culture, any of those things in your organization, you need to be engaging with that. It's only going to grow your organization. It's going to diversify your products and services, and it's going to make you more marketable, and people are going to want to work for you instead of you wanting to get people on your books. So bias isn't all bad. We need to recognize it. We need to capitalize on it, and we need to make sure that we're trying to mitigate the negative bias that we do have. Thank you for joining me today. Remember, get comfortable with the uncomfortable and make sure and include everyone.